So, in the middle of the pandemic last year, there was an inquiry that came to the Abbey from somebody in Newport inquiring if there was anybody in the community who would like to join a interfaith group starting in our little town of Newport. Now, because His Holiness and Venerable both are very strong proponents of any type of interfaith dialogue, I mean, it's been so much a part of our Abbey life here, and His Holiness continually sharing interfaith-wise, that I decided to jump on it and say, sure, I'd love to do it. And I was also a little bit curious for the few times that I've been to interfaith gatherings. They've been quite diverse and very, very special. So when I'm thinking about our Newport community, rural, logging, ranching, conservative community, I wasn't quite sure what interfaith would actually be like. So I did respond. And it is, for the most part, various Christian denominations. So part of this group, which in the beginning was trying to get together during the pandemic, but we all put a kibosh on it. So has been Zoom since beginning of August. So we've got Baha'i, Lutheran, United Church of Christ, Seventh-day Adventist, Mormon, somebody who's still kind of non-denominational, thinking about it, and then your token Buddhist in the room. So I have been it has just been a wonderful journey. We started out, the whole purpose of the group was started by one of the women who is of the Baha'i faith, and she wanted to celebrate an interfaith week sometime in the fall that was sort of to get people together to increase the understanding between denominations so that we could peacefully coexist and just try to understand each other more. And so for the first Zoom meeting, we shared a lot of our journey of how we found our faith traditions. And it was very wonderful to get immediately the sense of the deep searching and the deep connection with their paths and a commitment to transformation. No matter whether it was Seventh-day Adventists, whether it was the Lutheran pastors, whether it was the people coming from the Methodist Church, and their journeys were very much about either aha moments coming out of some very, very difficult situations, these points in their life where they really turned towards the faith of that they chose, and they are totally committed to be on the path. So the whole idea in these interfaith websites and stuff is that they say, well, you can have coffee together, you can hike together, you can garden together, you can have dinner together. But because we were in a pandemic, they were all, forget it. So we decided that we would start with some books to read. So Rena asked, well, what kind of books would you like to share? We could read a few chapters, we could talk about what we've read. So I popped out, let's read the Book of Joy by His Holiness and Desmond Tutu. And then another person put out a request for, it's called Love Poems from God, which is beautiful quotations from the great Christian mystics like St. Francis, St. John of the Cross, St. Augustine, and so forth. So we started the Book of Joy back in the fall. And it's been so wonderful because the skillfulness of His Holiness and of Archbishop Desmond Tutu is that a lot of the very fundamental topics and teachings of the Buddha and the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the way His Holiness explains when he gets into these dialogues, interfaith dialogues, they cross the denomination lines very, very easily. He makes them very accessible. He makes them very pivotal and important for people, irregardless of what your faith tradition is. And so we started with the book, and in the first half of the book are the obstacles to joy. So the group we went through despair, loneliness, envy, anger, stress, ambition. Because just like the Buddha put out the first things that you want to abandon first, and then the second part of the book is the pillars of joy, the things that you want to cultivate. So the book is basically set out like that. So I wanted to share some of the points that His Holiness puts out in this book that really resonated with this group. Now I have to say that they are probably the more liberal, they're very open-minded, very deeply spiritual in their paths, and very open-hearted, and they just love this book and felt a lot of connection to both the Archbishop and to His Holiness. So there is, and these are where we had like a general consensus, because one of the things that I had to kind of kindly and gently come to terms with in the beginning, is that some of the things that you say in these interfaith groups around here is that we are all one. God is taking care of us. We are all heading to God. We are all in union with God. And so I had to gently, in the first few weeks, gently and clarifyingly say, God is not in my universe. I'm the elephant in the room, thank you very much. And so the first 2 weeks, there was a little bit of this awkward kind of, not quite sure, because she doesn't believe in God, but what I tried to focus on was all the things we had in common, all the good qualities we were trying to cultivate. But there was a little bit of a bump in the road in the beginning, because I talked a little bit about the Buddha's life and who he was in general terms, but mostly about the qualities that he had developed, So that was kind of an interesting place, but we got to a good place there. And this book definitely helped. So one of the chapters is called Fear, Stress, and Anxiety. And His Holiness pretty much calls it out and says, we have these issues because we have too much expectation and we have way too much ambition. So he really gets into I, me, my, and mine, the whole self-centered thought, and the way he talks about it, the way the Archbishop talks about it, and that this really drives a lot of the suffering that we experience. So in these Christian denominations, self-centeredness is somewhat in their paradigm, but the ego is understood. And so when His Holiness talked about self-centeredness, they knew that it had to do something with their construct of ego, this self-obsession, this self-interest, this narrowing down about me, myself, and I. Then another chapter that just really hit a very, very deep core was the chapter that humanity's suffering, and His Holiness says this a lot, is that most of our suffering, by and large, is self-created. The human family, and how we identify with victim, how we play the blame game, how we, it's all your fault. If the world would just kind of reconfigure itself, I would be okay, and that I don't have a lot of responsibility. So it was wonderful to see all the different perspectives about this coming to the same point, that this is a truth for a lot of these Christian-based traditions, at least these folks. And it was very interesting to see that one of these universal Christian constructs that I was raised with as a Catholic is that sometimes the difficulties that arise in our life are God testing us, or you're getting punished, or you're getting rewarded. The people in this group truly believe that God does not send suffering to His children. He doesn't test them. He doesn't punish them. He doesn't send it to see if you're going to be a good kid. That humans pretty much bring it on themselves. That God, is pretty much union, harmony, love. He wants to, be with you. And you're your own problem. You're your own creator of your own problem. I've given you the tools. Now get to work. And that's kind of their paradigm as well. Then the other piece that also was wonderful to watch is that there's a chapter on adversity. Basically, thought training. His Holiness spells it right out. This is the Lojang teachings in Tibetan Buddhism, where you take circumstances that are going to show up in your life, that are going to bring a lot of challenges, and by turning the way in which you look at it, because you can't change the circumstances, you can sure change the experience of it by how you work with your mind. Right on board with this. It was like people just giving examples in the Zoom group on how they've done this in their life with their practice. And then there's a place in one of the chapters where His Holiness talks about Tong Lin. And that was like, whoa, they were like over the top. One of the Lutheran pastors, she was blown away by this practice. There's something in a Hawaiian spiritual tradition that has basically a taking-giving similar to this. It doesn't go after the self-centered thought, but there's a taking on of people's misfortunes and giving them your heart, all your good things. So Tong Lin went right to the core of her, that was a very lively discussion that day. And then the last one that I wanted to share, that there is, this fundamental truth that we really, I know that I try to work my practice around, is that people who hate, people who are violent, people who are confrontational, people who are angry, including ourselves, are really, really suffering. And that they are objects, not only are we our own objects of compassion, but we need to put them as objects of compassion in our practice. And to somehow separate the behavior from the action. We had a very lively discussion on how difficult that is. How to separate the person from the misdeeds. And one of the pastors, without saying anything about what was going on in her congregation, said, this past year, with all the anti-mask, anti-vaccine people in her congregation who have come in there with a lot of inflamed, stubborn, outspoken conspiracy theories, that she's had to work with them with this kind of approach, knowing that they're suffering and they're bringing a lot of that into the congregation. And how does she work with this as a spiritual teacher, a spiritual mentor? And it has been a very, very challenging year in their congregation, but she's working with it. So that was, it was just a really, we're getting deeper and deeper. And the whole group has been fully vaccinated for a few weeks here now. So last week we decided, that we could get together in the carport, socially distanced. And it was just lovely to meet. 6 of us were there. We had 2 on Zoom, and to be able to meet each other in person after almost a year. And so we're heading into the Pillars of Joy starting next month. So the things that we've been doing, small steps, is that we put an article in the Minor every month. One of us takes a topic, whether it's serenity or unity. Mine went in last week. Don, our dear Don, the reporter, he forgot to put it in, but it's the 4 measurables. So I've put the 4 measurables in. So everybody picks a topic of choice of their tradition and put it into the newspaper as an article. The second thing that we did, and that happens monthly, and then last year, in the middle of the pandemic, when the post office was getting all of this ramped up hostility about the mail-in ballots and the absentee ballots and all the stuff that was going on with the post office, we decided that we wanted to plant something in front of our little post office in Newport. So some of the group, masked up, went down and totally redid the soil and planted. We contributed probably over 100 tulip bulbs and daffodil bulbs. And they came up this past spring, and the whole front of the post office was filled with these beautiful tulips. And the whole community is rejoicing. It really beautified this concrete building. And the the folks in the post office really felt supported. They felt seen. They felt heard. So that was one of the things that we did as a group. And they had a little sign. The Newport Interfaith group has made this little garden bed. And then right now, I can't tell you too much about it, but we've got another one on the burner right now. There's been some very harsh anti-Biden, rather profane flags showing up in Newport. And we're going to do a somewhat spiritual counter flag project that we're going to come up with, that we're going to put. So that's still in the planning stages, but I'll share that as we go along. But we want to put some beautiful words on flags in town that'll counteract the rather harsh rhetoric that's on these other flags. And we'll ask the community to put them out in the town, and we'll see what happens. So that's kind of in a thought process right now. So I have loved being in the group. I very much appreciate opening my heart and mind to people of the Christian faith. I mean, I come out of a Catholic faith, and I kind of closed the door behind it. So this is kind of coming complete circle for me to be able to appreciate those who have this faith tradition, that we resonate a lot more than I thought we would. And I look forward to continuing on the journey with them for as long as we go.